I want to put in a picture of Dalembert for you. I guess I forgot to do that. So I wanted today to give you a different solution to the wave equation, which is the Dalembert approach. And I'm going to first do the history and then do the method. So who was this guy? He's a really interesting person. And it just, one of my friends who I work with tells me at the end of the day, someone who has a PhD, they have the content, and it really just matters whether you're able to work with someone else or not. Let's see. So Dalembert's mother used to be a nun, but she was given papal dispensation in 1714 to begin a brilliant social career in which political intrigues and amorous liaisons contended for first place. Dalembert was a product of one of these amorous liaisons. So Dalembert's mother actually gave him up, put him on the doorstep. Dalembert's father was an artillery officer named Destouche. I don't know how to pronounce that properly. But the mother left Dalembert on the doorstep of a church, St. Jean Le Ronde. And he eventually was put into a homeless children's site and christened as Jean Le Ronde. Dalembert's father was away when he was born, but he was away at war. But when he came back, he placed Dalembert with a wife of a glazier, the Mademoiselle Roseu. She was the one who raised Dalembert, and she was the one that Dalembert considered his mother. So he never really claimed his birth mother. He really had his adoptive mother be his real mother. Dalembert's education was paid for by a private school funded by his father. It's very interesting because Dalembert grew up around the same time as Euler. And you look at, Euler was a child of privilege, and he was raised and tutored by the Bernoullis. So it's just a completely different life going on, not that far away and around the same time. His father died when Dalembert was 9, but the father's family, kept his education up. So these schools that he's going to are not state-of-the-art schools. There's certainly no tutoring by the Bernoullis. They're just average schools. And even the school that he entered these, I'm not going to pronounce this right, Jansenist Collège des Quatre Nations, and that's where he changed his name to Jean Dalembert. The college was really basic. It was just a typical college, which didn't have, Lagrange wasn't there, Laplace wasn't there. It was just an average college. But it did have an extensive math library, and he spent the time reading, and he began his love of math in that college. The purpose of the college was religious. It was to prepare Dalembert for a life of theology. But even at that age, he was really against the idea of theology. And towards the end of his life, he was a disbeliever, and he's buried in an unmarked grave. But he didn't like theology, so he kept doing math. And in 1739, he wrote a paper just documenting some errors in Raynaud's text. They were not important, but that's where he started his math career. And then he submitted a second piece of work on fluid mechanics and was praised by a mathematician named Clairaut. He did apply a multiple amount of times to the Paris Academy of Science, but he eventually did get in. If you just look at his work life appeared kind of ordinary, but in his reality, his work life was not ordinary. He was difficult to get along with. He was stubborn, he was argumentative, and he would never admit that he was wrong. So in a world of academics where people are always criticizing everybody, and that's the way it is, it's probably not a good environment for somebody with that personality. He did improve a lot of definitions. Like, for example, he improved Newton's definition of force by a mathematical representation. He really at heart was truly a mathematician. And his philosophy was that he was kind of a non-experimentalist. So his philosophy was that there's governing principles of all of mechanics which can be derived mathematically. So we do use this approach today. We write down equations, the governing equations, and we start from there and move on. There was a rivalry that began between Clairaut and Dalembert during this time, because Clairaut saw that Dalembert had some of the same ideas that he shared, and so this was a competitive rivalry, but it wasn't really didn't go anywhere nice. Again, we think of Newton as the author of calculus, but he really was an experimentalist. So he experimentally calculated things and looked at relationships. Dalembert believed that you could theoretically derive everything with mathematics. He fought with Clairaut. His next one was Daniel Bernoulli. He provided an alternate treatment of Bernoulli's equilibrium and motion of fluids. And then he next had problems with Euler. So even in his the Paris Academy, he had trouble there. He actually didn't get along with a lot of people there, and towards the end of his career, they wouldn't publish anything that he wrote. So it has nothing to do with quality or merit. It has you just are a pain in the butt, and we don't want to accept your papers because you're such a pain. So eventually, he was asked to go to Berlin, and initially Euler was introduced to Dalembert by Bernoulli, and Euler himself thought that Dalembert's work was fascinating and really praised it. But Dalembert had trouble articulating himself, so this is a huge thing. So many times when he submitted papers, Euler was the journal editor. So he would read these papers and then kind of fill in the gaps and clarify the details and publish like a clarifying paper up front. But then because he had the clarifying paper sometimes published first or appeared first, he would get the credit for it. And so Dalembert had some trouble with that, and he was annoyed with that, obviously. So he felt like his ideas were being stolen. Dalembert was a social success, though. Around the later part of his career, somehow he got onto the social scene of France, and he became a socialite. Like, people loved having at parties. He was the life of the party. So he also had a social life, and because of his social status, he was asked to be the president of Euler's Berlin Academy, and Euler didn't like that very much. That 1747 was the year that Dalembert's work on vibrating strings, which we are going to cover today, was published, but it was a sore spot. Euler didn't want Dalembert to take that presidency. Here's actually a quote, I guess must be translated. Dalembert has tried to undermine my solution to the vibrating string problem by various cavils, and for that sole reason that he did not get it himself. He thinks we can deceive the semi-learned by his eloquence. So that's kind of saying you're not really one of us, and you're just confusing the general population into thinking that you're somebody. He wished to publish in our journal not a proof, but a bare statement that my solution is defective. From this you can judge what an uproar he would let loose if he were to become president. Politics. Dalembert actually did turn down the offer and had asked Euler to be made president. So when the offer was made to him, he didn't want it. What Dalembert is not known for is that he advanced the idea of limits, and he's actually responsible for the ratio test. So that's the person to blame when you're taking that in real analysis. He was very ill. I don't know if he was an atheist or agnostic, but he was a non-believer, disbeliever. He is buried in an unmarked grave for being a disbeliever. So this is 1717 to 1783. It's overlapping a lot of mathematical giants: Euler, Lagrange, Laplace. And I think in England at the same time we have Descartes. Descartes was there. In England we had the guy with the four-color theorem that proposed the four-color theorem. De Morgan was around at the time. So this is a time of mathematical renaissance, I'd say. Okay.